So we must have had plenty of people waiting to join the webinar because we already have 17 joining us. Welcome everybody to MCAP's monthly webinar. We're excited to have you. We'll give you a couple of minutes to sign on and then we'll go ahead and get started. I hope you're all enjoying your summertime. It's a bit on the too hot side for me over here. I have to admit, I've been staying inside and hiding in the air conditioning. But if you have access to some water, that could really help you cool down with these hot days. Okay, we seem to have leveled off, so I'm going to go ahead and let us get started. Then people can continue to join us as they're able. But today I'm very pleased to introduce Sara Smith and Bazile Panek, who will be presenting today's webinar about a tribal climate adaptation menu. Some of you might recognize Sara from our webinar a couple of months ago when she presented as the awardee from our Individual Adaptation Award. But today we have a slightly different focus. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my slides here. Just a minute. All right, is that visible? Oh, excuse me, I apologize. That's not what I wanted to do. All right, there we go. Okay, now we have everything in order. So today, Bazile and Sara will be talking about, and I will do my best to pronounce this correctly. Sara coached me a little bit. Jigadig Anishinaabe Ezitwad, a tribal climate adaptation menu for Indigenous-led climate adaptation. And we are excited to have both of them with us today. Sara is a citizen of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and is the Midwest Tribal Resilience Liaison with the College of Menominee Nation Sustainable Development Institute in association with the Midwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. She works on facilitating stronger relationships between tribes, climate researchers, organizations, academic institutions, and the Midwest CASC. In addition, she works with tribes to build capacity and provide support by helping identify gaps and assisting with climate resilient efforts. Sara holds a Master of Science in Ecology from the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and an undergraduate degree in Biology and First Nation Studies from the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. Bazile was born and raised on the Red Cliff Reservation and is a proud member of the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. Bazile recently graduated from Northern Michigan University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Native American Studies. He was instrumental in advocating for the official recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day by Northern Michigan University. He is now employed by the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission as the Tribal Climate Adaptation Menu Coordinator. Within this position, he will be collaborating with tribal communities to develop methods for which tribes can adapt to climate change in ways that respect cultural values and practices. Bazile's philosophy for life is to, quote, honor my ancestors, honor my people here today, and become an honorable ancestor for future generations. I'm going to pause really quick because I saw a hand shoot up. I want to make sure that everyone can see my slides and hear me okay. Can you give me a thumbs up, Sara and Bazile? Okay, So I'm going to keep going. If there's any issues, please feel free to, okay, I have 2 raised hands. Okay. Could you please type your question in the chat? I have a raised hand from Melissa King and Samantha Connolly. So just a couple of reminders. Oh, excuse me. So our webinar today begins promptly at 12 p.m. and we will also try to get you out of here right at 1 p.m. And we will keep you muted during the presentations, but we encourage you to use the question and answer function if any questions arise. And we will use that at the end of the webinar to have our Q&A session. We will also record this and post it on NCAP's YouTube channel at a later date. And to remind you of how you can use those functions, there is a toolbar either at the top or the bottom of your screen, and the Q&A is down there amongst those different options. You also have the ability to upvote any questions that you find particularly interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share now and pass that over to Bazile, who will get us going, and I'll also take a look at this question that has popped up.
Awesome. Good for the introduction, Susie. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully that works out right away. Awesome. So all of you should be able to see my screen now. Awesome. Yeah, so today we're presenting, and good job on the pronunciation, Susie. I think you might do better than I'll do, but Toboggan Jagade Anishinaabe Asia tribal climate adaptation menu for Indigenous-led climate adaptation is what we're presenting today. It's an honor to be here, and English, thank you for inviting me. Sarah's going to be joining me and helping me out here. I just started as the TAM coordinator about a month ago, so I'm still catching up with everybody, but I'm super excited to be here. You know, I'll let Sara give some introductions into the tribal adaptation menu.
Yeah, Segu Sofigu. Just to get us started off, I'd like to mention about the title of our menu, and Bazile, please feel free to jump in as well. So looking at the title for our menu, I want to let people know that, you know, there really isn't a way to translate a tribal climate adaptation menu into the languages. And so when we were creating this menu and we came to deciding on what the title was going to be, we took this to some of the elders in the community, and this is what was given to us as a title. So a real rough translation is doing things the Anishinaabe way. And when you look at Anishinaabe, it means the original people. So real roughly doing things in the original way. And so when you think about that, that goes back to our original instructions as people and our responsibilities to our relatives on this earth. And so before this, you know, NIAX, who we've based our tribal adaptation menu on, the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, they have a lot of menus in a similar capacity, but there was a need for an adaptation planning tool that worked for the tribes, and it helped integrate knowledges, culture, perspectives and values, as well as the Western science. And so we took 2 years to develop this culturally appropriate climate adaptation tool to work for the tribes and also for non-tribal partners who want to work with tribes. So as you can see on the left, this is our author team. So the authors are listed out in a circle, and this is really important because when a lot of papers are cited, There's always that lead author, second author, and then everybody else who comes afterwards. But while we were creating this menu, everybody's voices were important, even if it was contributing maybe a few words to the menu or writing entire sections. Everybody was recognized on the same level, and it was created with it being tribally led. So although NIAX had created these menus in the past, they helped us with developing this menu, but they really wanted it to be the tribes and tribal organizations that led this effort. And so as you can see on the bottom, these are a lot of the partners that helped write this menu. So we have tribal organizations, tribal business, tribes, and then federal and university partners. And so our author team is primarily in the Midwest. And so far, our adaptation menu was published in 2019, and we've been able to receive 2 awards, including the MCAP award, which is why we're here today. And then we also were able to receive the 2019 Climate Adaptation Leadership Award for Natural Resources through AFWA. So it's been a real honor to see this menu being recognized and being used across the Midwest and across the country, and even internationally being thought of to bring us, to other countries to help them use this menu as well. So this is just some of our author team. There's many of us, so only a few of us were able to attend the first award ceremony. But as you can see in the photo, kids are really important to the work that we're doing, and we encourage them to be in the room and at our workshops as we're doing this work to remind us for why we're doing this work, but also for them to be around these conversations. Even though they might not know exactly what we're talking about, it's important to have them there. So I'm going to touch briefly on climate change and tribes in the Midwest region to give you an idea of where we're coming from. So in the US, there are 554 federally recognized tribes, and that doesn't include all the state recognized tribes and non-recognized tribes that are across the US. And it's important that we recognize them because they are still here, even if the governments don't want to recognize them. And so when we're doing this work, it's not just for those federally or state recognized tribes, it's for all Indigenous people. And each one of them have their own climate stories, depending on where they are in the region. So these photos were taken from the Bad River Reservation in the surrounding area during the 2016 flood that happened up there. So each tribe has a different story, and that means each way these tribes want to approach adaptation is going to be different. And so how will climate change affect tribes? In multiple ways, right? So I mentioned the flood that happened in 2016 at Bad River. Bad River got hit again in 2018. And so this is a really important issue that we want to work on because tribes are depending on our non-human relatives to meet many of our needs, whether that be economic, ceremonial, medicinal, subsistence. They are important to who we are as people, and it's our responsibility to care for them in this changing climate. And when we think about them as our relatives and not as our resources. And this is really important when we do our tribal adaptation work and our management planning on our reservations, ceded territories, in the states we're working in, because it gives us a different perspective and relationship to these beings. And so decisions for these relatives were originally communal decisions, and done so with respect and thoughts of reciprocity. And that isn't the way a lot of decision making is made today. Today, it's mainly made by individuals or agencies and institutions, and it's coming from a resource-centric perspective and not a kin-centric perspective. So looking at them as our teachers, our relatives, our elders, with the perspective that we were put here last. And so we need to be learning from them and listening to them and helping them in doing our responsibilities to help them in this changing climate. And so many of the ways that tribes are tackling this is by taking a lot of their traditional knowledge and combining it with Western science to see how we can become resilient to what's happening on the landscape and to make sure our relatives are resilient as well. And so this is a screenshot from Glyphwick's vulnerability assessment version 1. And you can see the different levels of vulnerability for each of these relatives, and their names are on the left side. So you have Menominee, which is wild rice, and it shows how vulnerable each of these species are, both from a Western perspective and an Indigenous perspective. And so when we think about climate change, we think about things like loss to access for these culturally important beings, and how can we keep them going with our relationships that we have with them. Adaptation must be culturally appropriate and supported by our communities if we're going to be able to be resilient. And so one of the issues we face is that tribes are fixed to reservations or ceded territories. And with climate change happening, a lot of our relatives are moving or shifting their ranges across the landscape. And so because we're fixed to these reservations and ceded territories, we can't move with our relatives. So we need to figure out how we become resilient and how our relationship is going to change with new relatives moving on to our areas and away from us as well. So for the TAM beginnings, like I mentioned, this was something that was put into the work starting in 2016. So next slide. And this photo coming up is kind of the inception of the TAM. So folks that were on our author team, they attended a NIAX workshop focused on forested wetlands. And so at these workshops, just like the ones we put on, folks bring projects to work on. And so these folks brought a project focus on Menominee, so wild rice. And while they were going through the workshop, the menu they used was pretty good, but there was really this need for Indigenous perspectives because of how our values and our culture are incorporated into a lot of what we do. This was needed in a future menu. And so this is where the thought came that we need a tribally focused adaptation menu. And so a lot of our perspectives and values and culture call for observation and recognizing and learning from our first teachers. So like I mentioned, we need to look to our relatives and our elders on the landscape to understand what is happening, what our responsibilities are to them, and how we need to show our reciprocity to all our relations. And it's a very different perspective from a lot of Western science, where there's this emphasis of control and management and top-down system for these non-sentient resources. So it's really trying to shift these perspectives or change our paradigm into how we do adaptation planning on the landscape and with our relatives. And so this adaptation menu is primarily developed for the use in Indigenous communities and for those non-Indigenous partners who want to work with Indigenous communities or within ceded territories or on or near tribal reservations, right? And so it's helping to bridge communication barriers for non-tribal persons or organizations who are interested in this kind of work. And so it's designed to be used across diverse ecosystems and scales. And it's also developed, it was created to be adaptable. So like I mentioned, this was developed by authors who are Midwestern based. So we're coming from a very Midwest viewpoint. And so we don't include things in there such as like sea level rise and things like that. But it is adaptable enough to help with those issues as well. And this will be touched on later in the presentation too. And so this first version was based on Ojibwe and Menominee perspectives, language, and culture. And you'll see that in the menu itself too. And yeah, it's meant to be adaptable for other Indigenous communities to have their language and values and perspectives in the menu as well. So I'll
Thanks,
pass
Sara.
it over to Bazile.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to cover the guiding principles section of the tribal adaptation menu. This is how we begin the resource, and it almost can stand alone as its own resource as well, and to help guide you in what is ethical community engagement with tribes. So these guiding principles are a framework to integrate Indigenous and traditional knowledge, culture, language, and history into climate adaptation planning. In my maybe a little bit biased perspective, climate adaptation should be led by Indigenous people, and I think a lot of the TAM team would agree that Indigenous people have been existing with this environment for hundreds of thousands of years, sustainably for time immemorial. And we might have something to offer, might have some perspectives to offer in how to have a sustainable relationship with the land. So these guiding principles, they provide general guidance for non-tribal partners working in Indigenous communities, such as the DNR or the Forest Service or some of the other organizations that we'll mention. As Sara stated, it was written from an Ojibwe and Menominee perspective, but intentionally designed to allow other tribal communities to integrate their customs and culture. Right after this presentation, we're actually meeting with some Pueblo people and trying to figure out how they can integrate their customs into it. Our guiding principles focus on empowering tribal communities, let them lead climate adaptation, restore language and culture. Those have a huge role in the perspectives on environment, especially language as a way to view the world, different lens, and then also promoting tribal sovereignty. Ultimately, we always want to promote and sustain sovereignty of tribal nations. So I'm going to now cover TAM strategies and approaches. Actually, yeah, first let's ask the question, why a tribal climate adaptation menu instead of just a climate adaptation menu? And that's because we would say there's some downfalls of just a normal forest adaptation menu. I added some underlines in the first section of what we believe could be changed up a little bit. So the strategy for the forest adaptation menu is to prevent the introduction and establishment of invasive plant species and remove existing invasive species. Approach, eradicate existing populations or seed sources of invasive plants through physical or chemical treatments. So prevent, that first word, I think of stopping something, stopping a process. Invasive is a big one that a lot of conversation has been about the invasive species, and ultimately, who are we to say as humans, the last order of creation, what is invasive or who is invasive? Remove, forced removal, it reminds me of policies of American Indian removal. It also reminds me of immigrants who are simply seeking refuge being removed from their locations. Eradicate means to destroy completely, cause an end to the very existence of a living being. Invasive, there's that word again. And then physical or chemical treatments. Physical is that forced removal. Chemical treatment is kind of funny to me, or ironic maybe, removing invasives with more invasives, those chemical treatments. So with the tribal adaptation menu, we changed the wording up a little bit to more align with cultural practices, values, and perspectives. Maintain, Oxford Languages says that to maintain is to provide with necessities of life or existence. Improve is to become better, not to completely avoid. Looking to improve and not to completely avoid the issue and just destroying it, removing it, or eradicating it. Achieving balance, the equal distribution where all beings are accounted for in their benefits and each getting what they need to sustain their own life. We worked with a language speaker to come up with a word to describe invasive species, and just from a different perspective. We call them non-local beings. So Bakan and Goji Ga on Dadug. So these are non-local beings, a different perspective. They're not invasive, but they're just from a different area. So that understanding is more reflective of cultural values of respect for all beings. For our approach, we do have the word remove included. I think we'll have some conversations about that. I could also think of it as relocation. So they may need to be, or non-local beings may need to be removed from a certain area, but that doesn't mean that they're being removed or eradicated entirely. I like to think of it as a relocation. Even if these species need some physical eradication, we can think of it as almost giving these non-local beings an opportunity for an afterlife in a way. So I think we'll have some conversations with that. Communication is huge within tribal communities, and especially when you're engaging with them, you need to communicate with them, ask them what they want. And for those non-local beings, it's learning how to communicate, see their perspectives, explain our intended actions to them. So when I think of intended actions, I think that we communicate our actions with them, what our intent is. And from a Indigenous perspective, there are certain ways that we'll hear feedback from these non-local beings, and those intended actions may change as we continue to communicate with the non-local beings. All in all, there are 14 strategies, 50 plus approaches, and 100 examples, over 100 examples, tactics that are included in the TAM that were developed through assessments of existing adaptation tools, as well as focus group discussions and in those workshops where good conversations happened, and also discussions with natural resource professionals. So these are 14 core menu strategies that serve as a stepping stone to allow natural resource managers and planners to translate broad concepts into targeted and specific actions for putting climate change adaptation projects into practice. I'd like to really highlight these first three that come up in almost every project that goes through the tribal adaptation menu. Strategy 1, consider cultural practices and seek spiritual guidance. And this is a consultation, communication, like I said, that the key community members and elders, those knowledge keepers, must be consulted and communicated with, first of all, with any project that is presented. Understand the human and landscape history of the community. Really important to understand the history of your area. Why might climate change exist in this area? Well, it's because of a past action by an organization such as the DNR that had an effect on the environment. Understanding the history, we can move forward in the future. Strategy 2, learn through careful and respectful observation. The word we use for this is gikinawabi. Observation, I've heard from other TAM team members that a lot of things in Western society are rushed. They quickly come to a conclusion on what should happen. But from an elder's perspective, we should learn to slow down, carefully and respectfully observe beings such as non-local beings and learn from them directly and then move forward instead of coming to a conclusion pretty quickly. Strategy 3, support tribal engagement in the environment. The goal is to maintain and revitalize traditional relationships and uses, establish and support language revitalization programs. This is present in a lot of the projects that are constantly using language. In the tribal adaptation menu, language is a huge part. We talked about the rephrasing for non-local beings and invasives. We're also supporting tribal engagement through communicating opportunities for use of tribal and public lands, educating others on treaty rights and what it means to have usufructory rights of the land through resources that's put out by different organizations like the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission or others. And I'll let Sara take this.
All right, so putting the TAM to work, what does that look like? So to date, we have used the tribal adaptation menu with 41 different projects across the Midwest, Northeast, and beyond. So when I mentioned earlier about things like sea level rise not being in the menu directly, we had the Miccosukee tribe from Florida come up to work on a project regarding sea level rise, and they were still able to use the menu. We also had a tribe from Oklahoma come up, which we're going to mention a little bit later, but it's being used across the states and also with interest of us coming into different international places as well to use this menu. So it's been really great. We published this in 2019, and I'll show you these workshops that I think is on the next slide or two. But we've been having workshops since, oh, there we go. Yeah, since 2019. We did have a hiatus between March 2020 and then June of this year. And this is because we did try to have a mini workshop virtually, and it did not work out very well. And so this is because a lot of the work we're doing, it really does need to be in person, the way we have these workshops set up. And so we've had 6 since 2019, and we plan on having more in the future. These are normally hosted by a tribe. So our last one was also very unique. It focused just on Menominee, on wild rice projects across the Midwest. So that was a very unique one. And we have some coming up regarding the Tribal Forest Protection Act. So while we started primarily doing projects regarding natural resources, the projects have really just like blown our little box out of the water, looking at different projects like education projects, and so many unique ones. And it's really glad to see how adaptable this venue is beyond what we thought it could do. And so the process for these workshops, it's a 2.5-day workshop that we put on. And so we go through the adaptation workbook that NIAX has provided. And so we, first define our management objectives or, our goals for the projects these teams are working on. We then assess climate impacts. We reevaluate those objectives and goals. And then the menu comes on step 4, which is identifying adaptation approaches. And then after that, we have this monitor step, which really is asking, what does success look like for your project, whether that's monitoring or something else. And it's I can't pronounce that word, but from that monitoring or what does success look like, you can go back to step 1 if things change. And so it's not a linear fashion. It keeps evolving with the projects and other projects that might be tied to it and things like that. And so these are just some photos from our workshops. So like I said, our last workshop really focused just on Menominee, and it was also unique in the fact that it was held outside. This is our first completely outside workshop, and we did that because we wanted to be everybody safe with COVID and being able to be outside and give people space for this workshop. And so we learned a lot. It was really ironic that everywhere else was like 90 or 80 degrees. And for us, it was 52 and very cold and windy. And so the photos from those days are a little hilarious because you see people on the first day just bundled up in blankets, and then they thawed out the rest of the days. And so we adapted our workshop to having it outdoors. So like the picture on the bottom left, we used jars and beads instead of maybe posters we hang on the wall. And so with this workshop, we usually have 5 to 6 projects that people bring. And then those who don't bring a project get paired with a team based on their interest. And so we've had, state people come, tribal people, the bottom right, maybe central photo is students from Bay Mills Community College. So they worked on a project regarding leaks. So it's been really amazing to see who's been in our workshops. And then after these workshops, they get put into a cohort. So we have meetings to help people who are still working on their projects, or we have presentations on things that the group is interested in. So it's been really great to see, the menu built, then these workshops, and now we have this cohort of collaborators. So it's been a really great journey to be on. So one of the projects that I mentioned came from Oklahoma, and they actually came to our first workshop in 2019. So it was the Iowa Tribe of Oklahoma, and it was a wetland restoration project. So scale size, this project was relatively small. It was only 1/4 of an acre for wetland restoration, and it was located on their trust lands at a tribal complex that used to be used for education and outreach. So their goals were really to restore this wetland to provide habitat for a lot of creatures like amphibians and butterflies and other pollinators, and then be able to provide this as a water resource for the wildlife, and then coming back to using it for education and outreach for the tribe, and also recreational purposes for their tribal citizens. And so some of the challenges they faced were things like precipitation. So you can imagine Oklahoma and climate change happening. It's getting pretty dry. They're having a lot of erratic weather patterns, intense heat and drought. Through this workshop and a lot of help afterwards through the cohort, they were actually able to complete their project. And so this is the first project we had completed using the menu, which is really exciting to see.
So here's an example of another completed TAM project that has been through 2 different TAM workshops. This is the Minnesun website. The Minnesun team, through their conversations at the workshops, I think it was in 2019 and 2020, believed Ojibwe ecological knowledge through a website could bring more culturally relevant perspectives on how climate change is directly affecting the Apostle Islands in northern Wisconsin. So it evolved through conversations at those workshops. A website was chosen as the format to share these Indigenous perspectives on environment and climate vulnerability, specifically in those in the Apostle Islands. It's interactive, web-based. There are 360 virtual visits to 12 different ecosystems that were researched on with some that went through a vulnerability assessment done by the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore. So you can click on those red dots and kind of like view the landscapes and learn about different perspectives from the physical, plant, animal, human, and stages of creation regarding that certain area. There's also a fire icon that is kind of like let's think about it, let's talk about it, and presents you with a challenge of further thought. So I highly recommend you check out that website. It's minnesun.org. And this was officially launched in May of 2022, so just a few months ago. And it's a really cool completed project that I'm glad has been through the TAM. So as we close, I want to present you all with a few different activities that we'll continue to be doing as the TAM team. We want to continue to work on train the trainer workshops so we can build out our workshop facilitator capacity, get more people, give people the ability to host workshops so we can further share the tribal adaptation menu. It was mentioned that the TFPA, the Tribal Forest Protection Act, hoping to host some workshop series with some Midwest tribes and associated national forest lands. In 15 minutes or so, we're going to have a discussion with some Pueblo people about how they can use the TAM. And then moving forward, looking forward into the future, one of the elders who has worked with us says that knowledge is of the past and wisdom is of the future. So the tribal adaptation menu is ready to share its wisdom. We've done the knowledge building and presented this resource and done some workshops, and we're continuing to share the wisdom of the TAM. And we remind ourselves and ask ourselves, how can we continue to help tribes and Indigenous communities around the country use this tool and customize it for their own use, continuing to share it, getting tribes the resources for climate adaptation. How can we help non-tribal organizations use this tool to collaborate and communicate with tribes within your footprint? And that's referencing the guiding principles. How do you interact with tribes ethically, and how do you engage with them ethically? So miigwech bizindawiyeg, thank you all for listening. Those are our emails if you would like to contact us. I think Susie might share a link to the tribal adaptation menu in the chat, so you can check that out. And I'm excited to have a conversation with you all. I think we're going to open it up for some questions and comments, and hope you all enjoyed her presentation.
Great, thank you both so much. I'm going to go ahead and paste that link into the chat, just as Bazile said. So you can all go ahead and take a look at that at your own convenience. So we have a couple of questions that have popped up in the chat in the question and answer section. And I'm going to remind you all that you can go ahead and take a look at those, and you can also upvote questions that you find particularly interesting. Just a minute. All right. So before we dive into those, though, I had a question actually related to something that Bazile just said with regards to how to collaborate with Indigenous people and tribes that are in the area where you are also working. And something that you had mentioned in your presentation was the Indigenous approach emphasizes that we are last among the creation, and who are we to decide how things should evolve and how beings should live together, which is quite at odds from the Western approach, which is we need to manage nature and we need to be stewards of it. So when people are working together with these very different cultural approaches, what do you recommend to try to overcome this difference so that people can work together to create long-standing solutions despite the different perspectives?
Yeah, that's tough. That's a good question. I wish it was easy. Yeah, to mention first that the beginning part of it, you're right that there is, in Western society, we view humans as the top of all creation and the know-alls. Derek Jensen calls it the myth of human supremacy. Human supremacy is a myth in the sense that we've existed for how long, and we're dealing with these problems of climate change and that are visible today. While all of our other relations in Dinwiddie, Mogin, and Doug are having a sustainable relationship with the land. How do you get people to understand that? For me, it's been educating them just on traditional perspectives. These TAM workshops are super helpful. I've seen people's eyes open from the DNR, for the Forest Service, who have never been exposed to these perspectives, to realize that all our relations and these beings are. So I've seen paradigm shifts with people just by listening to elders, especially, and even the idea of invasive species is still. I'm still thinking about that one a lot. How I thought invasive species were like this really bad thing, and it's like, this is scary, and we need to kill them off like right away. So I'm still just having this conversation in my head about it. And wow, they are just non-local beings, and who are we to say who is invasive or not? So I think it's education, conversation with tribal members, especially elders and knowledge keepers, that can help you to shift your paradigm on things. Read through the tribal adaptation menu, see that traditional ecological knowledge has a lot to offer. I always recommend the book by Derek Jensen, The Myth of Human Supremacy. Absolutely in love with that book that explains that human supremacy is basically a myth. So yeah, I think that answers it. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add making sure to come with an open mind for these discussions, and making sure you allot plenty of time for them. When we were developing this menu, all of us authors are coming from different backgrounds and perspectives, and it took us 2 years to write this because we had those in-depth conversations, and we took the time to listen to each other and not talk down to one another. So that's really important, is to make sure you make the time for this, to have an open mind and be willing to challenge your own beliefs or perspectives when it comes to these things. So.
Well, thank you both. And on a related topic, there's a question that popped up in the question and answer from an anonymous person who asks, I work at a government agency creating an environmental justice framework. I have been advocating for an Indigenous perspective as we develop this framework. Is it appropriate to include language and rhetoric such as our relatives, or is that venturing on cultural appropriation or being disingenuous?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for asking that. Appropriation is a big problem, and I'm glad you're open to having that conversation about what's appropriation and what's not. And including Indigenous perspectives, I always ask who is sharing those Indigenous perspectives. Is it a non-Indigenous perspective on Indigenous perspectives that you're sharing? So who is sharing these perspectives? With Glyphwick, it's a lot informed by tribal elders and knowledge keepers that are sharing those Indigenous perspectives, though we're an organization and an agency that is informed by elders. So I think it's who is informing these Indigenous perspectives. Are they continually included in the conversation? And yeah, is it genuine? Are you putting actions behind your words? And are you truly believing that these beings are our relatives?
Yeah, and I think I'll just add that there are ways to um, write down different perspectives, right? So like you could change the language and things. So like Bazile mentioned before with the forest adaptation menu, instead of things like eradicate, right? Maybe use enhance or maintain balance. So using different language in that sense can also help shift perspectives as well without touching on that cultural appropriation. And I think that's important for government agencies and institutions. Like that's, I wouldn't say an easy way, but it's an easier step to help shift those paradigms and the way we see things is to use non-militarized language when talking about these relatives or resources, things like that. So I would say that's also a step you could take as well, is just changing up that kind of language.
So what I take from that is to be intentional with the language you use, but also to make sure that it matches your actions, to make sure that it's genuine, the language that you choose. We had a couple of questions about the kind of logistical aspect of sharing the TAM with other tribes, and I'm going to wrap my question into it if that's okay. So I'm partly just curious about what the experience is like working with tribes from all different geographies and from all different places. And Sara mentioned that it's been really great, so I'd love to hear some more details about that. And somebody also asked if you provide support for other tribal nations free of charge, and how much time do they typically need to contribute in order to complete a project?
Yeah, so having different tribal perspectives has been really great because we all come with different values and ways we go about doing things. So it's been great for that that cultural exchange. And I'm really looking forward to like our discussion in a few minutes with the Pueblo tribes to see how we can serve them, to help them, create a tool that will be useful for them. When it comes to these workshops, we do provide travel support. It depends on where tribal folks are coming from and how much we have in the budget to help with that kind of travel support. So, those who flew in from Miccosukee in Florida, we can give them a stipend as best we can to support their travel and their lodging. We provide food during our workshops, so dinner is kind of the only one that you really need to pay for yourself, but we do try to, get per diem and all that kind of stuff. It just really depends on where our budget is at the time. But yeah, we really do try to provide that so tribes can travel. And we try to make these workshops accessible in the fact that we move them around. So they're not just in one location. I mean, they are right now just based in the Midwest. And that's because where our, all the facilitators are located. So that's something why we're trying to do the train the trainer workshop, so we could have, more facilitators and locations for these workshops. So that's the long answer of the short question.
Great, thank you. And just sorry, I have like 3 more questions, but not enough time for all 3. So I'm just scanning them to see which ones we can answer in the time that we have left. So actually one just popped up talking about climate health threats and the tribal approach to dealing with those as a means of adaptation.
Yeah, that's actually been a question that's been brought up quite a bit, is on health and possibly creating a new menu just focused on public health and how to adapt in this changing climate. So I don't personally have a great answer for that. I think that's something we would like to do in the future. All of us authors, we come from a natural resource background. So when we don't have that health professionals expertise. And so I think that would be really something for tribal folks who do work in that realm, future idea, like to help create a menu focus on tribal health and climate adaptation. But that is something that gets brought up quite a bit is with health.
Yeah, it's a really good conversation that I'm looking forward to having a little more. When I think of climate related health, I think of food sovereignty a lot, as if walleye aren't doing too well, or in an Attig, maple sugar trees aren't doing as well, then we lose our accessibility to those traditional foods, and then in turn rely more on commodity foods or processed or inorganic foods that without climate change we would have been able to access traditional and healthy foods. And so I think of food sovereignty a lot and traditional foods in the discussion of climate health. But yeah, good conversation. I'm excited to dive into that some more.
It sounds like that's sort of the next step, the next thing to tackle is trying to address this one. Well, we are just about at time, so I wanted to thank both of you again for speaking with us today, and we had some great questions. I really appreciate our attendees engaging and being curious about this topic. Again, you have access to the tribal adaptation menu via the link in the chat, and I'm also going to drop a couple of links. We would appreciate it if you would fill out our post-webinar survey. We send this out every time, but it's helpful to us to hear back from you to make sure that we're providing webinars that are interesting, and also to hear your ideas for what we can provide in the future. And also, this recording will be posted on our YouTube channel within about a week. And we also have previous recordings from other webinars there available as well. So thank you again, Bazile and Sara. We are happy to have you here today. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you again in August.
So, miigwech, thank you.